Good evening. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this College of Engineering Leadership talk. Tonight we have Susan Gray, who's the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for UNS Energy and its subsidiaries, which include TEP. She came to TEP as a student engineer in 1994 and was hired as an energy management systems engineer in 1997. She advanced through positions of increasing responsibility to become superintendent of transmission and distribution design build in 2004 and director of design and construction services in 2011. She was named vice president for energy delivery in 2015 and was promoted to her current position in 2019. Susan has a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a master's of business administration from the University of Arizona. Yay. She encourages inclusivity and diversity of thought on her team and strongly supports STEM education and programs for girls and women. She serves on the advisory board for the College of Engineering and the Eller College, 2 professional association boards, and the board of directors for the Boys and Girls Club of Tucson. She's also a triathlete. So join me in welcoming Susan with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's get started by a little background. Tell us about yourself. What brought you to the U of A?
Actually, I was a swimmer in high school and came out here on a recruiting trip in May. Actually, it was May 5th, 100 degrees, and I saw the pool, met the team, and I was like, this is the best place in the world to swim. And happens to be a good school. So came out here to swim.
So you came to swim and you chose electrical engineering. Tell us about that.
Yeah, not initially. So I started in biology, wanted to go to medical school, and wasn't getting great grades and thought I probably need a backup plan in case I don't get into medical school. And started looking around, talked to one of my professors about biomedical engineering, which at the time was a master's program, and so you had to do either electrical or computer engineering undergrad. So after 2 years of biology, I switched to electrical engineering.
Went to something easy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Something I definitely enjoyed more.
So tell us about your career, sort of before TEP.
Well, while I was still in school, I did an internship at TEP. And when I graduated, TEP wasn't hiring. And so I went to work for a consulting firm in Denver for 1 year. So my career outside of TEP was pretty much the 1 year.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if you look back 10 years, where did you see where did you see yourself in 10 years back when you first started working as an engineer? That's what we want to get.
Yeah, so, early on in engineering, I knew I wanted to be in leadership. And so I pursued the MBA here at the Eller College. I enjoyed engineering. I like problem solving. I like the technical side, but I knew I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to become like a principal engineer. So I knew I wanted to be in leadership. I would have never guessed I'd have this role. I probably saw myself topping out as maybe a director someday.
Yeah, how'd that work out?
It worked out well.
Topped out a little bit. You're not topped out yet.
No, I'm not.
Right, yeah. So tell us about the path to the VP position of energy delivery at TEP.
Yeah, so it really wasn't a linear path at all. I started in our system control area doing basically software engineering and started the MBA program, and through that program I did a leadership project with the VP of operations, and he invited me to do a 6-month rotation after I graduated to do a 6-month rotation in operations. And at the end of the 6 months, I said, please let me stay. Like, please don't send me back. I loved it so much. So he let me write my own job description. I was the first project manager at TEP. I saw a real need to schedule and manage their projects much more efficiently. So anyway, I started in project management. So this is the construction groups in operations. And shortly after that became a supervisor in line construction. So line construction, there are no female journeymen at TEP even today. There are female journeymen, but not line workers. And so that was kind of unique, being not only the only woman, but much younger than most of the leaders in that group. And then kind of grew in responsibility through operations. And then actually my first touch into engineering was when I was promoted to vice president. So the goal at the time was, engineering and construction didn't work that well together, kind of siloed and kind of threw projects over the wall. So really the expectation for me was to bring those two groups to work much more cohesively, and that's been very successful.
Yeah,
So,
sounds like it.
yeah.
It's great. What would you say was the biggest motivator in your decision to pursue engineering, and how did you handle the challenges that came with the degree and the progression?
Yeah. So I talked about, I wanted to be a surgeon. And actually, as a kid, I used to tell my parents I wanted to be a mechanic. And I'd walk around with my screwdriver, and they're like, well, or you could be a doctor, like a surgeon. That's kind of a mechanic. And so I always thought I would go to medical school. And as I shared, I thought this was my backup plan. But I really enjoyed engineering. And through my internship at TEP, I really just enjoyed the culture and the work. And so, and I was kind of done with school. I mean, I did go back and get my MBA, but I really couldn't imagine doing, another 10 years of school to become a surgeon. And so, yeah, I think I just enjoy the problem solving. I really have always liked math. And yeah, I just like that technical aspect of it.
Yeah, when you find that thing that you're passionate about, that makes challenges just seem like part of everyday life, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the energy industry and this transition to solar and renewable energy that's going on. What do you think can be done about jobs that depend on fossil fuels and coal? And are there niches that the renewable market can fill? And has that started?
It absolutely has started. So we're starting to see more and more coal plants shut down. Right now, there's a lot of press about the Navajo coal plant that's up in northern Arizona, and it looks like it's going to shut down at the end of this year. We're partial owners of that plant. Salt River Project in Phoenix, they operate the plant, and so they have been migrating those workers to a gas-fired generator plant in Gila Bend. It's called Gila River, and we're partial owners of that plant as well. So that's, kind of a natural progression to just go to another power plant. And actually, in Tucson, we switched one of our units. We had one coal-burning unit, and we're now only operating it on gas. So completely got rid of our coal handling facilities. And so those workers, again, were just working on a gas-fired plant. Well, we're actually building 10 new units that are reciprocating engines. And these are basically like giant steamship engines that can ramp up and down very quickly. And the purpose is they run on natural gas. The purpose is to be able to ramp up and down to match the fluctuations in renewable output. And so that's still not really getting those workers out of their field. But there's, I think, to migrate to maybe a renewable energy role is probably a bigger stretch. Constructing a solar plant or a wind farm is a different skill set, and there's not a lot of maintenance and kind of 24-hour control like you have at a coal-fired plant. So I think instead I would see those workers potentially migrating to our other craft fields like substations, or because these are mostly mechanics or heavy equipment operators that we could definitely put into other positions.
Yeah. What troubles you the most about energy security?
I would say the physical security. So, a few years ago, there was a major shooting at Metcalf substation in the Bay Area. They never did find out who did it. I'll call them terrorists, I don't know. But they shot up all this equipment, and fortunately, the company PG&E was able to respond, and they had backup equipment. But if that happened at multiple substations, it takes years to build a transformer. So I think the physical security, we have 104 substations. We can't have people at every substation every minute of the day. We do have a lot of surveillance equipment, but it takes time to respond if some, so protecting from that type of an attack, I think, is a challenge. Also, as our generation shifts from coal to natural gas, of course, we're shifting a lot to renewables as well, but that shift to gas, our pipelines are at risk. So I think from not only a terrorist attack, but even just operationally, there was a pipeline in British Columbia that failed late last year, and it caused serious issues with generation really across the entire Northwest.
Do you spend a significant portion of your time thinking about resiliency?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we call it hardening of our substations. We put things, to prevent access or even bulletproofing important equipment. I was going to say the last thing too is cybersecurity. So as we, automate our system and we have meters that you can turn off remotely and things like that, there's always that risk of a cyber attack.
If somebody broke in, they could take. We see these in movies and things and hear stories.
Right.
Yeah. So a big concern.
Yeah.
So thank you for being concerned about it. Does UNS accept the conclusions of the exhaustive studies concerning climate change? And if so, why does it oppose the efforts mandated in initiatives like Prop 127?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around Prop 127, and I think just in general, our migration to renewables. So yes, we do agree that man-made greenhouse gas emissions are leading to climate change. And that's why we're committed to transitioning our portfolio of generation away from, to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions. So we have a long-term plan of really getting out of all of our coal interests except for the one plant in Springerville that we own. And so there's several, we've already shut down two coal units in the past 10 years, and then we have 6 more lined up for retirement. So we're already shifting in that way. We're replacing those resources with both natural gas, the plant up in Phoenix, as well as we're adding quite a bit of renewables, so both solar and wind. And in our target, we've kind of put that target out there to be 30% renewable by 2030. We're probably going to achieve that much sooner, probably 2021, 2022. But I think that Prop 127 was the wrong approach. So Prop 127,
maybe explain a little bit. Yeah.
So the way that the electric utility industry is regulated in Arizona is through the Arizona Corporation Commission. And it's really a stakeholder process where the commissioners work with, all kinds of stakeholders to come to an agreement that this is the best thing for Arizona. And so then they legislate or they regulate us in that way. And the way that Prop 127 was designed was to change the state constitution. So there wasn't really a stakeholder process. There wasn't any discussion with those stakeholders leading up to that legislation. And ultimately, the way that it was proposed, it would have increased our customers' bills. Like an average residential customer's bill would be $500 more a year.
Oh.
That's pretty significant. That would really have an impact, I think, on our economy. And so actually, TEP would have increased their earnings because it would have required a significant amount of investment. So in some ways, we were neutral to it because if that's what our constituents want, then we will earn money on that. But we will earn it because you're now paying $500 more a year for your energy. And so it's really about the pace of this transition and making sure that we do it in a way that can support the economics and not devastate our economy here in Tucson.
Yeah, great. Just by the way, I read an article this afternoon about a new technology to take carbon dioxide and turn it into coal to clean the atmosphere. and it sounded pretty promising.
Okay.
So interesting how things
Yeah,
come around.
right, full circle.
Yeah. Okay, so this is our leadership series, so let's talk a little bit about leadership and insights and challenges.
Okay.
How does managing or leading tradespeople differ from managing and leading engineers?
It is different. So at TEP, we have 10 different apprenticeship programs. So it's a 4 or 5 year program to become a journeyman. And these are our tradespeople that we employ. And they are unionized. So they're represented by the local union, and there are definitely working rules that we have to abide by. And so we negotiate a contract that sets those working rules. So I think there's a little less flexibility in working with tradespeople, as well as, I'm not sure that pay is really a huge driver to incentivize performance, but it's not even an option with union employees. We don't pay for performance. Everyone at that position gets paid the same. I think another common complication is that engineers and the people who build the things they design, there can be some friction there, right? So the construction folks are like, you don't even know, I can't build it the way you designed it. So I think there's that natural friction, and for me as a leader, working in line construction, I obviously didn't know what they did. I didn't have a lot to offer technically, but my approach was just to be curious about what they did. People love to talk about what they do, and so you kind of build that rapport, just asking, hey, tell me why you're doing it this way, help me understand, and maybe I can build a spreadsheet for you someday. Kind of trade off on that.
Yeah, great. So how do you promote teamwork and gain the team's respect? I mean, you talked about listening, but talk about that.
So I guess I'd like to share a recent experience. So when I was promoted to Vice President of Energy Delivery, actually the next year, then I was also asked to lead our Unisource gas and electric companies. So I had operations, engineering, and these 2 other companies that were outside of Tucson. And so really 4 disparate teams that I felt like there was a lot of opportunity if we could get them to work together, a lot of synergies that we could identify in our operations. But also just that leadership team. I mean, leaders all face the same challenges. So getting that leadership team to feel like more like one team, I think there was a lot of opportunity to learn from each other and support each other. So my approach was to start getting the senior leaders together. We started talking about, hey, how can we make this feel like one team? And so we talked about, we really want to influence it to feel like one culture. And so we started to define what that culture that we wanted to have. We called it our commitment to excellence. So we based it on some core values, and when we developed, here are some of the behaviors that we would expect to see to support those core values. And so then we started kind of organically talking about, you wouldn't do this big rollout of, hey, here's the commitment to excellence, but really started at the leadership level and then holding each other accountable to, that thing you just did didn't really line up with our commitment to excellence. And, oh yeah, you're right, so it's really influenced our culture, but I think it's really also brought us together as one team.
Did it take a while to
Oh,
see
yeah.
the change? Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's been, I think, 2 years since we started that. So yeah,
And you
it's
feel
slow.
like you're reaping the rewards
I do.
from that? Yeah, that
I do,
sounds great.
yeah.
Yeah. How do you balance all the professional, work life that we have with your personal life, running marathon or triathlon,
Yeah.
for example?
I have a great support system. So my husband actually just retired last year, which has been great. So we have 2 teenage kids, and my grandmother, who's 98, lives in Tucson, and so he's like support for everyone in our family, and he's awesome. My mother-in-law cooks for us, so that's a huge blessing. But I think too, just like personally, there's kind of seasons of where it's time that's really busy, and then times where you're not as busy. And so I try to, when I'm not as busy, just really be present with my family, and just try to set the device aside and just enjoy that time when we can be together. And then you mentioned the triathlons. I do like to exercise. For me, that's a big stress release, and it's really important.
Just part of your routine and
Yeah.
staying healthy.
I trade sleep for time to work out.
Yeah. So, what are 3 to 5 leadership principles that you've discovered and executed that have contributed to your success?
Okay. Well, you mentioned in my bio my commitment to diversity and inclusion. Right. So I think that the two go together. So you could, I would define it, diversity is about, inviting everyone to the party, but inclusion is about inviting the people at the party to dance. So to really get involved. And so if you just get a bunch of diverse people together on a team, they're not going to be any better. They're not going to come up with better solutions unless they're really inclusive and collaborative with each other. And so you have to set up an environment where people feel like, I'm not just invited to be here, but I actually can contribute. Mm-hmm. And so personally for me, I think there was a transition, and I can't really identify when it happened, but I think I went from thinking I had all the answers to realizing I had none of the answers. And so really realizing that I could bring an idea to a team, and it would be so much better by the time we walked out of the room if I was willing to just hold loosely to that and let the team kind of build on it. I think early in my career I was more check the box on collaboration. That, well, I ran it by everybody, and they said my idea was good.
Nobody complained.
Nobody complained, right? Yeah. So I'd say that's one. I did talk about listening earlier. I think that that's something that one of my teams is really struggling with right now, where we just did an employee engagement survey, and the employees are saying they just don't feel heard. They don't feel like their opinion counts. They don't feel like that people are really listening to them, and that's that's, I think, disrespectful. Mm-hmm. So I think that communication really starts with listening, and that's you talked about how do you build a team, how do you get people to respect you, and I think it just starts with treating people the way you want to be treated, and that starts with listening. I think, so you asked for 3 to 5. I'll go with one more.
Yeah. Yours have been good ones so far.
Okay. So I've been focusing a lot lately on change leadership. And I think there's definitely a good way to do change, and then there's a not so good way to do change. And so to me, change leadership means that you're going to engage employees in the process. People don't really like change. It's not natural to like change. But people really don't like change that's done to them. So, if I choose to change my hairdo, I was part of that decision. If I don't like the outcome, it'll grow back. But if someone else chooses to change my hairdo and it doesn't go well, it's not gonna sit well. So I really think that it's important to involve the people that will be impacted by the change in the process of deciding how do you change, and really get that buy-in up front.
So a little off script, but
Sure.
You're very thoughtful about these principles of leadership. And have you developed that through your MBA program, engineering, do you read a lot? What are the things that you do that help you develop such good leadership qualities?
Yeah, I've had such huge opportunities in my career. TEP paid for me to go to the Eller School to get my MBA. So I definitely learned a lot of leadership principles through that program. But I think that, over time, it's experience. It's being around really great leaders. Our CEO is an amazing leader. I learn a lot from him. I've had some outstanding mentors throughout my career. TEP also offers a lot of leadership development. So I've had, numerous classes on leadership. I went through a leadership academy at TEP, and I currently work with an executive coach. So just kind of always investing. I do read books on leadership, but just kind of always thinking, just want to be very thoughtful about, my leadership style and how I impact our organization.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about women in STEM.
Okay.
Being a woman in a STEM field, what are some challenges you've faced, and what are your fears?
So I'll start with, my time in here at the university. I only remember 2 other women in my engineering class, in my cohort, and they were both older students who had careers and came back to engineering. So that was unique. We didn't do as much teamwork as I think the college does now, but we certainly had team projects, and so I learned pretty early in that process, kind of how to be the only woman on the team. And that translated very well to my experience in operations. I was often referred to as the girl, which I kind of liked. At the time, I wasn't offended by it. I'm also not one of these people that looks to be offended. But it was in my early 30s, and I thought, well, that sounds young. I'm okay with you calling me the girl. And I was the only girl, and some people called me the princess, and I was like, well, at least it's not the queen, I guess, So just, kind of going with the flow. Mm-hmm. But certainly some challenges. I'd share one experience. I was a supervisor in line construction, and there was a position to become a superintendent, so it was the next level up. And there were 3 men who were also supervisors, and they had all been with the company like close to 30 years each, and kind of grown up in line construction. So they were all journeymen. One of them had a college degree, so they expected this was their job, right? They were next in line, and they were thought only competing at least against each other. And I got the job, so that didn't go over well in the beginning, and I'll take a big responsibility for how that went. I could have handled that better, but I think that being younger than them and being a female, kind of an outsider in a lot of ways, that was a tough pill for them to swallow.
You didn't have the 30 years that they had.
I didn't.
But you've obviously did a pretty good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. So women are not commonly seen in engineering fields still to this day. Mm-hmm. How can you inspire other young women to pursue the field and encourage them in ways that uplift them rather than feeling like, we are trying to force young women into STEM fields?
Yeah. So I think you need to start young, and we do. I've participated in a middle school group that I think they call it Girl Power. Amphi has a Girl Power group, and I think it's about exposure. So, it's important for girls and young women to see other women doing this. So when we have career fairs and we talk about trying to get not just attract females to engineering, but also to our craft positions, we have women demonstrating these crafts because it's important for young girls to see that, oh, okay, I guess women can do that job too. So I think that's important. I also think that that girls and women need male advocates. They need that support to say it's okay to be different. It's okay to be the only girl in the room, and to kind of get comfortable with that. I had great parents. I didn't really realize that was a challenge. I didn't know about a glass ceiling or anything like that. Obviously I wanted to be a mechanic. So I didn't mind. I can throw a football. I was kind of a tomboy. But I think other girls need more encouragement. And so just kind of coming alongside them. And then also I think giving them strategies. So, early in my career, kind of trying to make connections with my male coworkers. I'm a sports fan, so it was no skin off my nose to watch ESPN all weekend and then come in on Monday and talk about the games with all the guys. And that was just, a really easy connection for me. And so I think helping young women find, how can they make that connection? How can they show up in a way that makes it easy to connect?
Yeah, great. So what qualities is TEP looking for in new grads that you hire?
Obviously we want technically strong, preferably U of A grads.
Well, that's good. Perfect.
I will say our senior director of engineering is an ASU grad, but we give her a pass. We do celebrate diversity.
Yes.
So. But I think, we're looking for, Typically, engineers are quick learners. So, but I think something that makes a student stand out or a new hire stand out is their ability to communicate. I spent the afternoon with some of our engineering ambassadors, and I was just so impressed with their communication skills. Yeah. Being able to work in a team, engineering is not an individual sport. Definitely, you have almost everything they do needs to be in a team. And I think just kind of being able to adapt to a culture and be able to dive in and participate in a way that they can add value right away.
So food for thought for those going to the career fair to talk to TEP.
Yeah.
So you talked about these teams, and TEP is a large company, and there has to be many different groups at TEP. How does it all work together as a team?
Right. So there's kind of the natural teams that work together. I talked about construction or operations and engineering, and so engineering's designing the project, and construction is going to build the project and maintain those assets. But then there's the kind of the one-off projects that seem to be more common these days. So maybe a large customer that has a unique request will require kind of an ad hoc team to be formed. So now you've got engineering and construction, but you might have your regulatory, your legal, your customer group, finance, accounting. So then you kind of build these, we'll call them power teams, and maybe have an executive sponsor that leads that one team that's really just based on that one project. And so then teams will form and then dissipate as those projects are completed. But I think it's a great way for the various disciplines to understand kind of how they impact the bigger picture and how they can support the other disciplines.
So we talked about TEP versus UNS, and UNS has several companies,
Right.
And so you span across all of those. Do you see that sort of collaboration across the different companies?
I do, and that's something that, is, I would say, in its infancy. So there's still a lot of opportunity to improve in collaboration, but we do a lot of the engineering in Tucson for the rest of the company that's not in Tucson. And so there's sort of a natural opportunity to collaborate there. But even just, basic processes like procurement, the offices that are not in Tucson would prefer to do it a different way. So it's important to collaborate on, well, what's the best way to procure material in Springerville or in Flagstaff or in Prescott?
Yeah, great. So if you were going to give career advice to our students, what qualities do you think are most important when you're reviewing applicants for either full-time jobs or internships?
I think similar to what I said before, looking for engineers that can communicate well, that want to work on a team. I think too, just being curious, that the candidates would want to understand more than just kind of that project that they're focused on, but kind of how does that project then fit into the bigger picture? That's important.
Yeah. So what is something you learned in your career that you wish you would have learned in college? It's always a loaded question.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to how I think I could have improved my new superintendent role and how I started in that position. So I guess early in my career, I thought that you kind of get, when you're a high performer as an individual contributor, that's sort of how you get new opportunities. And so you think, well, it was my skill and my ideas that got me to this next level. And so they clearly want me to have all the ideas. And so when I applied for that superintendent position, I proposed a plan. And the other three guys, I'm sure, also had proposed a plan. So when I was given the job, I showed up and said, well, here's my plan. This is what we're going to do. And I think to do it over again, and what I've learned is that, as I shared earlier, my plan would be better with input from others. Mm-hmm. And so I think that transition would have gone a lot smoother if I had sat down and said, hey, can we all share our plans and figure out how we can meld these plans into one? Because they had 30 years experience. I maybe had 10.
Yeah.
So.
They might have had some good things in their plans.
Yeah, so I think the lesson there is that, you don't have to have all the answers. You can rely, not just as a leader, but even as an individual contributor, you need to rely on your team. Yeah.
So what advice would you give on working your way up in a company? In your case, from a student to intern to senior VP and COO.
So the joke now is that, our interns are future VPs. So one of the guys, he had a new job, and I said, "Hey, how's the new job going?" He goes, "Well, I have all these future VPs that are working in my area." So you never know, right, who's going to become the next VP. I actually worked with Dave Hutchins, who's now our CEO. We worked together when we were kind of new in leadership, and of course, had no idea this was where we'd end up. But I just think, just as a principle anyway of mine, you just treat everybody with respect. And so I think you build trust that way, and I think people want to follow you if they feel like you respect them. So you kind of have to start early in your career with influencing without authority. And then hopefully you never use the authority that you're granted as you move up into your roles.
That's very good advice. Great.
So important, yeah.
So what's the best advice you'd give a junior student who wants to be a good engineer?
I think that, we tend to kind of get ahead of ourselves and kind of think about that next job and that next job. And it's good to have a long-term plan. But I think that you really need to focus on the job that you're in right now and make sure you're doing that well before you set your eyes on the next job. And I think, too, that, kind of enjoy the journey. So I'm not saying I did this. I was kind of always the next job person. But to just kind of enjoy where you're at and make the most of the position that you're in. And then take the opportunity to kind of learn how what you do impacts the rest of the organization. I think in the long run, it'll pay off because you'll have a better understanding of the business.
Yeah. How much of what you learned as an undergraduate have you applied to your work? I'm not sure we should be asking.
So I would say, the classes that I took, the concepts are important. And I only took one power class. But
it's one more than we have now.
yeah, it was a remote class from ASU.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think, so I'm not sure, necessarily the technical stuff that I learned, but it was more about the approach to problem solving and working in a team. And certainly through the MBA, kind of learning all the business skills and kind of that networking definitely apply to what I do.
Have you gone back to your books and notes and things ever?
I feel like my books might be outdated. Probably are
Current,
available
still current, by the way.
online. Yeah. And back to the previous question too. We tend to, because at TEP what we do is so specific to our industry. We tend to really provide a lot of training to our new hires. So we expect you to come in with kind of the skill and the ability to learn and to problem solve, but then to specifically apply that at TEP, we do provide quite a bit of training.
Sure, that's great. So let's open the floor up to some questions. We have a mic for the questions today. How are you, sir? Good to see you tonight.
Good to see you again. Long time ago.
Not that long ago. You were here last
We
year.
used to take classes together. That guy and us guy, yeah.
Yeah.
My question would be, I understand that one of the great holy grails for the power companies now is the smart grid. And it's perhaps one of the problems that's standing in the way of renewable energy because you have these flashes of power that come and go. Care to talk about that?
Yeah, I'd love to talk. I actually haven't heard that perspective. So the smart grid is really about automation, and I actually think it's the solution to be able to integrate more renewables into our system. Because the smart grid, so this is about having sensors out on the edge of the grid, and that kind of sounds cool, the edge of the grid. But being able to have more visibility, it's interesting for an industry that's been around for so long, it's actually not been very smart. We don't have a ton of that visibility and technology that you would think. And so we've, for years, relied on customers calling us to say, hey, I'm out of power. Now we have meters that can tell us. And so, yeah, I think that the concern with renewables is that they fluctuate in their output. They're not as steady as a traditional generator. And so having visibility of those fluctuations allows us to respond much more quickly and in an automated way. So there's benefits overall in our reliability and our efficiency in operating the grid because of smart grid technology. But for sure, it's critical for as our renewable integration increases.
You talked about phasing out coal. We haven't really talked about nuclear. What's your sense for where that's going, and how does that affect your decisions? Because you're obviously part of a larger grid.
Right. So we don't own any nuclear, but there's the nuclear plant in Phoenix that we certainly buy power from, and it's, it's in the market. It's reasonably priced. Because it's an existing nuclear plant. To build a new nuclear plant would be, billions of dollars. And so I don't really see any new nuclear plants being built, but it is emission-free, right? So it's, I think it's considered a clean energy. It's not a renewable energy. And that was one of the problems with Prop 127 is it didn't recognize nuclear as a clean energy source. So I think, I'm sorry, your question was?
Given the future of nuclear, how does that impact your decisions in terms of power supply?
Yeah, so our long-term plan, or I would say our 10-year plan, is to get to a point where we have 30% renewable, 30% gas, and 30% coal. And I think people would be surprised that we want to keep coal in our fleet, but there's certainly a lot of benefits. If the gas supply is interrupted, you've got 30 days of coal sitting on the ground. So we know that we can run for a long time on that coal that's sitting on the ground. And but there's also, coal plants don't ramp up and down as quickly as we need them to. So there's reasons to have kind of that more balanced approach to our generation.
Herb.
Get back to a leadership or management question. The silo issue that you mentioned a couple times, I saw the same thing 20 years, 30 years ago. But what specific steps did you take, not just at the leadership level or the senior leadership level, but how did you break down the silos? I think that's a classic problem for engineers, and so.
Yeah, really, you do have to take small steps. And so when I was the senior director of T&D operations, I partnered with the senior director of engineering. And I remember a project where I guess we were directors and we reported to senior directors, and the senior directors were, I would say, at war. There were points for making the other team look bad, for sure. And so there was this one project that didn't go well, and the senior directors couldn't agree on a solution, but this guy and I had a plan. So we actually had to go kind of behind their backs to fix this without them knowing that we were going to collaborate on the fix. So it kind of started with that one relationship, and then just influencing the people around us. And really, it was like as problems came up, you couldn't start pointing fingers. If you point fingers, you're just people get defensive. If you just start talking about how can we fix this, how can we move forward as a team instead of pointing fingers, that's really changes the conversation. And then you also just have to nip it. So when people kind of fall into that old habit of, I'm an ops person, I'm gonna cut down on engineering, you just have to say, hey, you know what, that's not cool. And you just nip it right there and, oh, okay, I won't say that anymore. It's sort of one conversation at a time where you have to over time just shift the mindset.
Yeah, please.
You've talked about renewables, but you didn't ever mention storage,
Yeah.
battery or otherwise. So do you see a path there to have storage in an economic manner and different technologies or what?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are in the process right now of, we have a project that we're purchasing the power, so we don't actually own it, but it's 100 megawatts of solar and 30 megawatts of battery storage. We currently own 20 megawatts of battery storage, and we're really doing it, I would say we're more in the R&D phase right now, because there's a lot of strategies of how to use the batteries. So I think the lithium ion technology, there's minor differences in the actual battery itself. The difference really comes in how the software that you use to control it and kind of the decisions that you use to use the batteries. So battery storage is definitely part of our future. APS up in Phoenix just announced that they're going to install 850 megawatts of battery storage in the next 5 or 6 years. But we're also looking at kind of an old technology, which is hydro pump storage. So there's a project up in northern Arizona near Prescott. This would basically be building 2 reservoirs. So one's at a higher elevation, so when we're overproducing solar in the middle of the day, we can pump water up to the higher reservoir, and then when we need the power, run it down through. Basically, it's like a hydro unit. So that's a really interesting project. It's 2,000 megawatts, and so it's bulk storage, which I think really changes the game. I think that it will make renewables, we could really saturate the market with renewables. Water is an issue in the desert. So right now we're trying to figure out how do we fill those reservoirs without impacting the water table.
Good snow runoff this year.
Yeah, I think this year we're making progress.
Yeah.
As you moved up the corporate ladder, how would you say that your interview sessions, your preparation for the interviews, and then the requirements that you needed for that job changed as you went up?
That's a good question. So I'm having flashbacks to, I was asked to interview for the assistant, I was the assistant manager of the call center. And I was like, really? You want me to apply for that job? Oh yeah, you should apply for that job. So I did. And after the interview, the HR person said to me, it didn't seem like you wanted the job. So I guess I didn't sell it too well. But I think, kind of my more recent positions I haven't had to interview for. I think the interview has just been my job performance. But yeah, as to kind of progress into those positions, the interviews definitely get more challenging. It's more about, kind of start off with tell me about a time where you did X, Y, or Z, to, hey, what's your plan? What are you going to do? What's your 3-year plan for this group, or your 90-day plan for, how would you start in this position? And so I think you have to be a lot more thoughtful about not just getting the job, but then what are you going to do when you're in that role? And so the preparation, I think, is a little bit deeper. It's not just thinking about what's my experience, but maybe then talking to other people about, what would you like to see if I was in this role? What would you like to see change? And how could I support you from that role? So I think it takes a little more interaction with the people that you would be working with in that role.
You know the job better too.
You do.
As you move up into other roles, when you're outside and you're new, you don't necessarily know the job, so you have to talk about your experience.
That's right.
Then when you're in and you're trying to get the new job, you talk about what you would do at the job. Right?
That's a good point for an internal progression.
You said it, not me. I'm just repeating it. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions? Don't be shy. Jim.
Promise not to touch the mic. My name's Jim Bajan, so I'm the academic dean for the College of Engineering. I wanted to thank you for coming to talk to our students. I also wanted to thank you for TEP sponsoring the ambassadors. It means a lot to us that you're here and that you sponsor those students. But
Thank you.
my question, I have actually 2 questions that come from a father's perspective, not from a dean's perspective. So my daughter's coming up on 6 years. She's an engineer. She's been out of school for almost 6 years now. My two questions were, the first one, you mentioned women having advocates in engineering organizations. Can you say a little bit about how that happened in your case, you know, how you identified the advocates and how they helped you? And then the other question had to do with when you came to realize, yeah, this MBA thing might be a good move for me. I need the business perspective. There are other things I need in order to move forward in my career.
Yeah. Okay. I'll start with the MBA question. That one's easier. I guess I knew I wanted to be in leadership, and I thought, you know, TEP is willing to pay for it. I'm going to, you know, go get my MBA. I wanted to get my MBA before I started having kids. So I kind of did it young. I think that it worked out well for me, but I don't think that I was as thoughtful as or intentional as it may seem. I know that when I was promoted to vice president, it was mentioned that it was important that I had an MBA. So it definitely added value. Of course, it added value in my ability to lead and my ability to make good business decisions as well. But I guess I didn't really realize the impact and that it would be important to have an MBA to actually get to an executive role. But now I know that. And then I think, you know, thinking about STEM and having advocates. So I was fortunate that I had some male advocates, well, male and female, volunteer, you know, pursue me, offer their support to me. And of course, that's awesome. That's amazing. But I've also sought out some advocates. And so, you know, maybe as I faced a challenging situation, I would go find someone that I felt like could give me a different perspective and maybe help balance out. I was probably having an emotional response in a situation, you know, hey, help me see the other side of this before I go engage with this person. But, you know, I mentioned as I was in my MBA course that I partnered with the vice president of operations to do a leadership project, and he became an amazing advocate for me. He was a kind of a front runner for diversity and inclusion, and really wanted to help me succeed. And then kind of, but I did have other people that came alongside me as well that would really, you know, like the VP of HR at one point, she saw that I was just kind of getting frustrated that in the environment that I was in at the time, and just, you know, came alongside me and said, hey, you know, be patient, you know, this is the path we have laid out for you, and just be patient, stick in it, and we'll take care of you. So just kind of calming my nerves, calming my emotions at times was important. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. Nick, you have a question?
Hi, so this has to do with a leadership question. You mentioned that back then you were up and coming, you had 10 years on, and other people had 30 years on. I really wanted to know what was your kind of personal experience when you had to deal with dealing with the friction of leading a team with people who might have been there longer than you've been around. Because obviously they'll have an ego and they'll be like, why haven't I been promoted and you are promoted? How do you get over that fact?
Yeah. So I would say I've gotten better at that. As I mentioned, I don't think I handled it really well at that first try. But, you know, watching those guys kind of finish out their career in a place where they didn't feel valued, they didn't feel heard, they felt like they'd been cheated out of that position, and that's how they left the company, that they just invested 30 plus years of their lives. That was kind of an eye-opener for me. Like, I had a role in that, and I didn't really want to see that happen again. And so I think that, you know, I have had to lead people that have previously been my boss or have certainly have been at the company longer than me. And so I think there's a respectful way to transition into that role. You know, I don't like to say people work for me. I like to say I work with people. I like to talk about how I support them, because I feel like, you know, that's a leader's role, is to support their team. And so it's not about having the authority to do whatever I want. And then I think, being respectful of their experience and really, engaging them. Okay, you might be disappointed that you didn't get the job, but you still add a ton of value. You still have all of this experience that you can bring to our team. And so finding a way to get them to a place where they feel like they can add that value in a way that is meaningful to them.
Well, I want to thank you very much. And as Dean Bagent said, thank you for your support, TEP support for the engineering ambassadors. And thank you for being here tonight to give us these inspirational sharing of your experiences and views. It's been terrific.
Thanks so much, Larry. I appreciate it.